Welcome to Supporting VISTA Member Wellbeing, a webinar for AmeriCorps VISTA leaders. I'm your host, Andy King, and our presenter is Ben Brubaker, Social Justice and Student Leadership Program Manager at Tulane University in New Orleans. In his role, Ben recruits, trains, and manages student leaders in several programs, including service learning assistants, community engagement advocates, and public service fellows. Ben himself served as a VISTA member and a VISTA leader, and then he went on to manage the VISTA program at Tulane. Ben, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. I can't express how happy I am to be here with VISTA leaders from around the country. This is a topic that's really close to my heart because it touches on a lot of my own experiences and struggles as a VISTA member. But it also gets at some of the key aspects of the VISTA leader role that really made me fall in love with this work. So for me, engaging with VISTA members and supporting them was both the most challenging and also the most rewarding part of being a VISTA leader. And it played a large part in steering my career trajectory towards leadership development and what I do today. So before we get into the outcomes of this workshop, I really want to just invite everyone to check in with your bodies and just take a couple in breaths and out breaths just to ground yourself in this moment. Take another in breath and breathe out. And just try to come back to this present moment. It's so easy in this Zoom world that we are living in right now that we can often disconnect from our bodies and from each other. And so I really just want to invite y'all to try to stay present with how you're feeling, and to try to, stay comfortable and relaxed as much as possible throughout this presentation. So in this webinar, we're going to explore some common challenges that VISTA members face and look at ways to build trust in a culture concerned with their well-being, and how to support VISTAs in ways that balance accountability and support. So the outcomes for this session include identifying some of the dimensions of VISTA member well-being that can impact their service. And then next, we'll examine how establishing trusting relationships with appropriate boundaries is essential for supporting VISTA members. And finally, we'll explore resources that leaders can recommend to address common challenges for VISTAs. So there'll be several opportunities for you to join the conversation throughout the session. We'll have time near the end to answer your questions, and we'll ask you for your feedback on a short survey. So in order to really understand the challenge of VISTA turnover and burnout, we have to begin by exploring what it means to support a member's well-being. And to do that, I'd like to get your thoughts.
All right, so before the session started, we posted this question, and some of you have already weighed in, so thank you for that. But now to make sure everyone has a chance to weigh in, we're going to put the question up again. And the question is, based on your own experience or intuition, what are some of the common reasons that VISTA members burn out or check out? We're using the chat for that. Be sure you use the little drop-down toggle to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone will see your response. And let's see, earlier we heard, I think from Andy, saying either having not enough work to do or feeling like their ideas are not valued. And there were a couple of other folks who sort of corroborated that, or it could be two extremes, maybe too much work or not enough work to do. Let's see, not seeing the results of their capacity building effort, feeling like they're not making a difference. Alyssa pointed out low pay, lack of work to do. So I see a little bit of a theme emerging here about not enough work, or maybe too much, and or the work is not what they expected. It feels like it's not impactful. Long turnaround times to get approval, running into bureaucracy. Sometimes the challenge can be related to the supervisor or the the host organization site about what VISTA is all about and what VISTA members should be doing. Yeah, there's some of the more mundane aspects of work, like paperwork and reports and stuff like that. All right, so a lot of different ideas coming in here. Thank you all for that. Ben, what stood out for you?
Well, I think there were so many great responses here, and it goes to show that there's a variety of things that can come up, but some of the things that I saw included just like the real everyday challenges of, this role that it's not a high-paying role. It's, VISTAs can struggle oftentimes with finances and with other basic needs, but also the desire to have an impact and to have a meaningful experience, and how when that desire is not fulfilled or when people's expectations aren't met, there can be some real disappointment. And then also just the importance of communication and how, a lack of communication, whether it's with between the site and the VISTA project, whether it's between coworkers on the site, that can be really difficult to navigate. So I really appreciate everything that y'all shared. And I really want to see how some of these insights can really offer us some insight about how to support our members. So we're going to look at some of the data from CNCS that actually tells us why VISTA members tend to terminate. So based on the recent data, the 4 most common reasons that VISTA members exit their service early are: number 1, to take a job; number 2, for health reasons; number 3, financial hardship; and number 4, dissatisfaction with the program, right? And we know there's also a variety of other reasons. And we know that even before VISTA members decide to leave, they might have reached a point of burnout or disengagement, and that can happen for a variety of reasons. So today, rather than focus on a single approach, we're going to think about how we can support VISTA members holistically using a few dynamic approaches. And we'll look at the role that community can play in helping members feel supported and engaged. So one of the first models I want to offer, this might be something that's familiar to folks, but just understanding the many aspects of human wellness. And surely this isn't exhaustive, but there's several different models that have been useful from psychology or organizational development that can help us understand some of the critical areas of support that can help people be successful and also feel fulfilled. And so one of the best known models is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this model has been theorized and utilized to help managers and educators understand the many levels of human need that are interconnected and how they build on each other. So Maslow's hierarchy includes physiological needs like food and shelter and sleep. And the next level up is safety, which includes personal security and health. And then also the next step is love and belonging, a sense of connection like friendship and family. And then there's esteems like recognition and freedom, and finally self-actualization at the top, right? So really coming into who you are as a whole human being, right? And in order to support VISTA members holistically, we have to be mindful of every level of human need, even those we may not be directly responsible for. So Maslow shows that, when you're supporting VISTA's wellness, we have to do this holistically. We have to concern ourselves with the whole and not just the part of a person or a system. And so when we think about taking a holistic approach, that means we can't only think about the things impacting VISTA members only at their site placement or only within the confines of the VISTA program. We also have to be mindful of the wide range of factors that impact their well-being, including larger social context, right? Just thinking about how difficult this pandemic has been on so many people, right? Thinking about the popular uprisings this summer for Black lives. There's always, a wide range of social contexts that are impacting people, and it doesn't impact everyone in the same ways. So oftentimes in the workplace, it's an unspoken norm that workers are expected to just be professional and that anything else going on in their life is a separate issue for them to deal with on their own. But we're going to explore some ways that both you can support VISTA members in being their full selves while also still maintaining appropriate boundaries. Another model that's popular in leadership and student affairs is the 6 dimensions of wellness. And in this model, we can think about some of the distinct yet overlapping areas of VISTA members that might impact their well-being. And so the 6 dimensions that are represented here include occupational, so how things are going at work or in their volunteer work, physical, social, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional wellness. We might think that VISTA leaders are only responsible for supporting VISTA member well-being in the occupational area. But even in that, VISTA leaders may not have much control over the day-to-day on-site experience of VISTA members. So we want to encourage you to think about what it looks like to demonstrate care, concern, interest, and support in some of these other areas as well, and to think about how they may impact your VISTA members' well-being and service experience. Keep in mind, personal well-being can suffer when any one of these areas is threatened, even if it's not ultimately impacted directly. So for instance, during this pandemic, people might, just the fear of getting sick or losing a family member can produce intense anxiety to the point of being debilitating. And one doesn't actually have to get sick to feel this impact. So just keeping that in mind, right? It's just the threat to any one of these areas of wellness that can really start to cause harm. So one tool that I found incredibly helpful in how I manage and support student leaders is this Gallup Q12 survey. So Gallup developed this amazing tool based on thousands of interviews and a comprehensive study of workplaces across a wide variety of sectors. And they were able to develop a list of 12 questions when, if an employee could answer in the affirmative, it typically indicated higher levels of employee engagement, right? So it's sort of these 12 areas that if you can meet them, then you're creating an environment for employees to be more deeply engaged. And we could think about engagement as the opposite of feeling burnt out or checked out. It's an employee who's highly engaged. They'll feel a strong sense of intrinsic motivation. They'll have access to resources that help them succeed, and overall, they'll be less likely to terminate early. And so this is a tool that you can incorporate into your work in a variety of ways, and whether it's just questions that you might ask VISTA members in your check-ins, or maybe developing best practices for your team or for your site supervisors. You can kind of take these questions and just think about what are some areas that we can improve as a VISTA site, or different VISTA programs might implement some changes that can help sort of meet some of these underlying needs. So in particular, I want to highlight questions 4 through 7. So you can see these questions. In the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? And you can also check in with yourself right now and answer this. Does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? Is there someone at work who encourages your development? At work, do you feel like your opinions count? Does your opinion matter? So these are all really important questions to think about. And I'd like to hear from you, what you think about these particular 4 questions that I've highlighted. What are some of the common themes among them? Why might they be important questions to help VISTA members become more fully engaged in their work? So we're going to use the chat box, and I'm going to ask everyone to just, think about it, post a response, and remember to select all panelists and attendees before you click submit. And we're going to just check in and see what are some of the common themes that you notice among these 4 questions. What are they getting at?
And while we're waiting for responses to come, Ben, I was going to mention that in our earlier chat, a couple of folks mentioned the item number 7 about, this is feeling like their ideas don't matter.
Right, exactly. You're already starting to see some of the themes from what people were sharing early on. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing some of the themes include just people's intrinsic value. Do you feel valued at work? They highlight culture, right? So is there a good workplace culture? That
about general well-being.
Yeah, super important. The importance of self-worth, of being appreciated. So all this, this might seem rudimentary or simple, but sometimes it's actually one of the hardest things for managers and organizational leaders to do, is really create a culture that values every individual. I see one TIFF post that encourages the heart of members, right? So part of that transformational leadership model. That's great. words of affirmation, making sure people feel affirmed. They seem to be along the lines of managing up, asking oneself, how do I feel about my superiors? So that's a really interesting point there, and something to think about, right, in terms of leadership, is that it's not always about what you can implement because of the authority or the position that you hold, but how can you inspire, how can you influence, and how can you collaborate to really start shifting the culture, even if it's just within your small, VISTA team or VISTA cohort. All right. So what really stands out, I think, from all of these is that they emphasize the need to be treated with care and humanity. Recognition matters. Having a supervisor or a VISTA leader who genuinely cares about you, it matters. Being heard and listened to matters, right? So when we look at all these aspects together, they really center on the importance of relationships, okay? So just keep that in mind, and we're going to move on to the next slide. So one of the main themes that we're talking about today is well-being. And often in our society, the pursuit of our well-being is thought of as an individual journey rather than a collective one. And I would argue it's both. However, today I really want to take some time to emphasize this idea of collective care. Collective care focuses on our interconnection, the culture that we create, the way we treat each other in our communities. It also emphasizes the many strengths that we have to contribute to each other's well-being. And in this sense, the VISTA leader's role is not just to support individual well-being of members, but to foster a community of VISTA members and other team members, which is humanistic, inclusive, which draws on the strengths and resources of each member for the benefit of the whole. And this is part of what we mean when we talk about taking a holistic approach. To truly support the whole VISTA member, that also means we have to pay attention to the broader context and the communities they're a part of. So we're going to explore some of the connections between individual support for VISTA members and collective care. First, we need to spend some time looking at how to foster strong relationships through deep listening and clear communication. And then we'll look at a few strategies for building a community of care and a team culture that's humanistic. As part of that, we'll also explore how to draw out the collective wisdom of the group to create a web of support. So, the first aspect of collective care is developing supportive relationships with your VISTAs. And you accomplish that through deep listening and clear communication. But if we want to develop supportive relationships, we also have to pay attention to VISTA members' relationships throughout the program, right? With their site supervisors, with VISTA members. And we know that as VISTA leaders, you may not have as much control over other people's behavior, but you do have control over your own behavior and interactions. And you can actually use your relationships to help influence and model and sort of nurture a healthy community and sort of demonstrate what a supportive relationship looks like. So one framework that I've found really helpful is restorative approaches. So this large umbrella that's rooted in sort of the origins of it come out of restorative justice. And it's basically a new paradigm for thinking about how we structure community, right? So oftentimes in the workplace, rules, processes, structures, they're focused on producing outcomes rather than fostering relationships. Restorative approaches help us shift the paradigm to emphasize human connection and accountability. So what this looks like is that relationships are central to building community, and that means all voices are valued and everyone is heard. There's also a culture of high expectations coupled with high support, right? So we're not sacrificing one or the other. It's really about doing both together at the same time. And that also problem solving is done collaboratively, and that space is made for effective communication, right? Which means giving space for feelings and needs to be shared and heard, right? So often we're expected to just communicate in a way that's emotionless, that's subdued, and we want to actually create space for people to share how they're really feeling. So if we can invest time and energy on the front end into building strong and trusting relationships, it actually helps us be better equipped to navigate challenges and conflicts as they come up. It helps us kind of see the other person as fully human and not just a box to check off or just another VISTA member that I have to check in with, right? There's actually a human connection there. And it gives us a more full picture of the various factors and constraints that may impact their life. So one thing to keep in mind is that conflict often occurs during times of stress when people perceive a threat to their needs. And when we use a restorative framework, it helps us understand each other's needs better and also to decide together how we want to navigate conflicts in a way that balances accountability and support. So one model that really, I think, helps put this all into perspective is just to understand what it looks like to collaborate with a VISTA member who's going through some stress, right? So when you think about VISTA members who are stressed out, they're underperforming, homesick, they might be burnt out or checked out, it's very natural for VISTA leaders to respond in any number of ways based on our own assumptions and our habits. So the graphic on the screen shows the result of both low and high levels of accountability or control. So some people, it may be your normal way of responding, right? That there's no excuses. We're going to enforce the rules as they're written, right? Other people, their instinct may be to just be more flexible and more caring and nurturing, right? And either one of those approaches, when taken to an extreme, can really set up a VISTA member to have things being done to them or for them, right? Which is disempowering. So we're aiming for the restorative approach that balances a high level of accountability with a high level of support. And in this approach, VISTA leaders would help coach and support VISTA members in their goal setting, solving their own challenges. VISTA leaders might provide resources and encouragement and a supportive presence, but also set boundaries, right? And help co-create deadlines and a plan for addressing challenges, right? So this can be a helpful framework as you're creating a performance improvement plan or strategizing an intervention to support a struggling VISTA member. Just thinking about, okay, how am I balancing both accountability and support? So one other thing that comes to mind is doing check-ins, right? So how many of you, I'm just curious if you can put it in the chat, do regular check-ins with your VISTA members? And if you do regular check-ins, is it weekly, monthly, quarterly? So I'm seeing some people say every other week, monthly one-on-ones. That's pretty normal, right? And it sort of depends on how large your VISTA project is. Great. So this is great to see. So we're gonna talk about how you can utilize these check-ins to both develop a trusting relationship, but also to gather some information about how you can support, the VISTA member as a whole human. So on the screen, you'll see a note-taking sheet, and we developed a template that you can use. You can download it from the VISTA campus using the link in the chat, or you can create your own note-taking sheet, that kind of fits your style or includes questions that you might want to ask every VISTA member. And this can just help you remember to check in on different factors of VISTA member well-being. So taking notes, maybe marking down potential warning signs, areas of concern, setting goals with the VISTA member, and also remembering important personal information that can help you just get to know the VISTA member better. So goal setting, connection, and follow through should really be the priority. And follow up is key. You want to make sure you have a process or a plan to follow up after the meeting. So that could mean following up, the afternoon after the meeting and offering specific resources about some of the challenges you talked about. It also means that when you set goals, checking in with them next time around and asking them how they've made progress on different goals that they've set. So one of the areas that you might think about checking in with VISTA members is how things are going at their site and how that connects to their work or their career. So it's really normal for VISTA members to just want to use this time to take out their frustrations at their site. They might have frustrations about their local VISTA project. It could be the regional office. These can be warranted and unwarranted complaints. But it's crucial that VISTA leaders don't get defensive, right? You really just want to be a listening ear. And it's an opportunity to explore ways to help the VISTA member get more deeply engaged at the site, or identify supports that they might need. So when you're doing these check-ins, also keep in mind that, while we have these 4 different categories on this example, that all of these things are interconnected, right? So you may start a conversation talking about their work site, and that could lead to a conversation about mental health or family issues or financial challenges. So just keeping in mind that these are conversation starters. They're not meant to just be boxes to check. Next, we'll talk about social, emotional, and physical wellness. And it's important to emphasize VISTA leaders play a really important role in making sure that VISTAs know what benefits and resources are available to them, both through the VISTA program and locally in the community. VISTA leaders should really aim to become experts as much as possible on what resources are available through the VISTA campus and locally. But it's important, right? You want to compile this information and be able to leave it to the next VISTA leader. You also want to make sure to update it, make sure that the resources being offered are still current, still accessible. And so I also want to emphasize that when we're checking in about VISTA members' wellness or well-being, it doesn't mean that we should be their counselor or therapist. In fact, most of us are not qualified to do that, and it's not our role as a VISTA leader. But it's still really powerful to just be able to offer a listening ear, right? So leaders need to be clear on their role here and just communicate that to the VISTAs so they don't give the impression that they are, you're there in the role of a counselor or therapist, right? Or a concierge. We really want to just be a supportive presence. So when we think about finances, housing, food, these are some of the kind of basic needs that we saw at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And keep in mind, for a lot of people, many of these topics can be difficult to talk about. It can be really sensitive to disclose information if they're struggling or need support. And it's our job to normalize asking for help and providing support. So one example could be talking about finances, right? It can be a huge source of shame and disempowerment for VISTA members who might be handling their finances independently for the first time, or maybe they themselves have been struggling to get out of poverty or might otherwise feel inadequate when it comes to money. And so also, it's an opportunity to just normalize this as a challenge and to, direct the attention away from the individual, right? And thinking about what are some of the structural challenges, and also what are some of the ways that we can resist and build solidarity to be able to have our needs met, right? So the last thing I want to emphasize is that you really want to create space in your check-ins for just the personal kind of relational aspects of what's going on in someone's life. So that could be really mundane things like just understanding what it is that they like to do in their free time, right? What gives them joy. It could be talking about their dreams or their family. And in this, it's really important, I think, throughout, but to demonstrate active listening, to be empathetic, and really be genuinely curious about who they are. Those are really powerful tools for connection. And I can't tell you how powerful an experience it can be to just offer to listen to a VISTA member for 1 full hour and just let them talk and vent and explore any issues they're going through. You don't really have to have any answers, right? You just need to be present. So just keep in mind, that is such a valuable resource to offer them. So if it feels overly mechanical or procedural, as you're doing the check-ins, the VISTA may not trust you, right? This is not meant to feel like an interrogation or a checklist, right? You really want this to feel like an organic conversation as much as possible. And when I'm doing check-ins with students, for example, I'll often tell them, hey, I'm just going to take notes just so I can remember things because I have a bad memory and I really care about them and I want to remember, some of the important things that they tell me. So one of the things that I think is really important to keep in mind is just that it's important to maintain boundaries. And this is also important for your own wellness. So that includes when you're interacting, communicating, as you're building relationships. You want to be able to clearly state your own boundaries in terms of what your expertise is, what your role is as a VISTA leader, and also set limits on what you might explore with your VISTA. So for example, you might say, hi, unfortunately, I understand that you have all these questions about your taxes, but I'm not a tax professional, right? That's really important. We don't want to overextend ourselves, but you may have an idea of where some accessible or free tax help is available in the community, right? So another part of maintaining boundaries is practicing radical consent. And this can look like giving VISTA members plenty of options to agree on when or how they feel comfortable meeting, being clear about how the notes will be used, giving them an out to not have to disclose certain information. So that's really important in terms of building trust and comfort. And then creating space for VISTA members to share without pushing them or forcing them to disclose. So just keep in mind, you aren't entitled to personal information about your VISTAs' private lives, but as you build organic relationships, you may find that VISTA members will be willing to share things that do impact them and can help you support them. Lastly, we really want to just be mindful about avoiding rescuing behaviors, right? So we want to support members in solving their own challenges, and that's part of making sure that VISTA members feel empowered, and that we're not doing things to them or for them. So now we're going to move from the individual relationships that you build with VISTAs and look at how to build a culture that supports the whole individual and the whole community. So you're going to see on the screen a couple examples of what I would describe as dominant work culture in many nonprofits. And this comes from Tima Okun and Kenneth Jones' white supremacy culture in the workplace, right? So the dominant work culture in the US, and this includes nonprofits and universities, it typically prioritizes outcomes and work performance over well-being or the individuals and relationships within those organizations. This is so deeply normalized and ingrained in us, in our institutions, that we often don't even realize that this is the norm. We don't question it. We don't understand how it impacts us. But we see patterns of domination through white supremacy, patriarchy, heterosexism, ableism, and other systems of oppression, and they're so normalized, it just feels like the air that we breathe. And you may recognize some of these characteristics in your own workplace or in previous workplaces. So the cumulative effect of this dominant workplace culture is that it creates an environment where employees can feel or really be seen as disposable or exploitable, or where employees only feel valued for what they can produce rather than just for the intrinsic value of their humanity. And so this type of culture can leave us feeling disconnected and inauthentic. It can make us feel lonely and abused. And I want to emphasize that even though the dominant culture is rooted in systems of oppression, it doesn't only impact people who are targeted by those systems, right? It dehumanizes all of us. And so, all of these characteristics, they aren't inherently wrong or bad. It's just the fact that they're not chosen. They're not discussed. They're just assumed. So when the dominant work culture is just assumed as a norm, it can have this effect of boxing people into these arbitrary standards and really erasing important cultural differences, including the ways that people think about respect or courtesy or professionalism and conflict.
All right. So again, we want to invite you into the conversation. And this time, we want you to share your ideas on what are some of the possible antidotes to dehumanizing work culture. Have you seen organizations do things to create a humanistic and inclusive work culture? And if you haven't, do you have some ideas of your own for possible antidotes? So again, we'll use the chat. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees. That way everyone will see your contribution. And again, think about possible antidotes to that dehumanizing work culture. All right, we've got some already, validation, acceptance, compassion. So yeah, Tiffany, being able to offer those to those on your team, using inclusive language, communication, and using voice. Wellness days and time off, right? So it's attending to the physical, the health, the mental health dimensions. Carly shared having open door policies and prioritizing self-care. Humility and openness, or sites taking into account the pay in regard to the hours. So yeah, being realistic about what the experience is for VISTA members. And having upper management show sensitivity. Great. These are all really great ideas and practices. Ben, what do you think? What are you seeing here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so much of this is really intuitive, just based on our needs. But it's, all too often it's a little bit rare that we see a culture that really embodies some of these ideas. So, providing forums to decompress and connect, especially after a difficult national event. We can't overstate the importance of the ways that these, huge events in our lives, or even just, on a local scale, how that impacts people's wellness. Genuine interest in the VISTA members' well-being instead of just what they can produce, right? And so this is really important. Like, you really just have to care. As a VISTA member, you can't force other people to care as a VISTA leader, right? But you can demonstrate it, and you can really take an interest and really prioritize the humanity of each of your VISTA members. So yeah, helping VISTA see their worth and experience, and yeah, helping them with their future careers, right? Being invested in their future. All these are really important things. All right, so this is really great. I'm really impressed by all the ideas that y'all are sharing, everything that's happening here. Y'all really have a good intuition for what this could look like. And there's some really great antidotes that are in the article as well. So you offered some really great insights, and I want to continue building off of some of the things that you talked about and look at some of the ways that you can work to co-create a culture of care in your VISTA project. So a couple things, suggestions, ideas, culture sharing activities. So sharing recipes, songs, or stories, practices that are grounded in care and affirmation or connection. Creating community agreements with your VISTA members, creating a list of expectations about how you want to be together, how you want to support each other and hold each other accountable, what boundaries you have. And I would emphasize, in terms of creating community agreements, the first 6 to 8 weeks are really crucial for establishing group norms and expectations. That's when a VISTA member, right, when they first enter the program, that's what's going to set their norms as they enter the program. So every new member that comes in, there's an opportunity to reset those community agreements. And it's also an important opportunity to manage expectations, right? So, letting VISTAs know ahead of time, what's written on your VAD when you first join, things may look different, and how can we support people through the ups and downs of, adapting what your actual work will look like on the site. Resource sharing. So facilitating, the creation of a shared resource guide. You might think about using a Google Doc with local and national resources that are accessible to your VISTAs, and that can support their various dimensions of well-being. You can also utilize story circles, creating group time to build trust and community. This is a practice that comes straight out of restorative approaches. So asking each person to share stories about, their strengths, their gifts, their resilience, open up space for people to share their feelings and needs. That's an opportunity to develop, close bonds. And finally, accountability buddies, so pairing up VISTA members to check in with each other and set goals for their wellness. So that can just be another way to help foster connection within the cohort. I just want to name that culture change is hard, right? It takes time, way more time than a VISTA leader has in a single term. And yet, as transformational leaders, VISTA leaders have this opportunity to set the tone for your program, to help shape the norms. You can contribute to the overall climate. And so you need to assess what are the areas you can have influence over. And this can look like how you model relationships or how you set the tone for your cohort. It can be inspiring your service sites or empowering your site supervisors to take a more humanistic approach. But one of the most important things of building a culture is just letting it develop from the ground up. So VISTA leaders you can utilize a variety of approaches for getting insights, feedback, and participation from VISTA members that can help shape a community that supports everyone in the ways they want to be supported. So I just want to emphasize again, you cannot create a culture of care from the top down, right? You have to create space for everyone to engage, to share what they need, and to participate. So moving on to really emphasizing this aspect of collective care, right? And thinking about collectives. We don't have a ton of time to dive into these concepts because there's so much to be said about them, but I want to offer this as a potential inroad for VISTA members to explore the concept of collective care. So there's various models of collective care that have sprung forth over the last few decades and even longer than that. But a lot of these are rooted in disability justice, the Black liberation movement, queer and trans, gender nonconforming communities. And you may be aware of some of these models, including mutual aid, care webs, or pods, which have become, I think, more prevalent, more visible during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if anyone's familiar with, mutual aid or care webs or pods, would love to just know if that's something that VISTA members have talked about or are working on, but we're not going to dive into it too much. It's important to note that mutual aid, it's not just simply philanthropy or the pooling of resources. It's really the act of practicing solidarity together and developing a collective consciousness to understand, what are the underlying power structures that create so many of the challenges we face. So it's about this sort of like nurturing a network and a community that more closely reflects the world we're building towards. And so this is an important project both for VISTA members themselves, but also for the work we're doing, right? And translating it in our communities as well. So one practice that has been amazing and very practical is crowdsourcing ideas from VISTA members in terms of resources and support. So it's really important, again, that you know what benefits and resources are available through the VISTA program, but also taking the lead to like create a spreadsheet, to create a meeting, spend a whole meeting time together where you can dive into different resources that have been helpful for VISTA members. This is also a space for VISTA members to share or disclose challenges that they've been experiencing in a way that feels supportive with the whole community. So, if you can create a Google Sheet or, whatever resource you want to use to just collect information about like cheap local restaurants, what are deals on groceries, what are, resources around affordable housing, where are the local libraries, where are the cheap and free social events or accessible fun things to do in the area. Making sure that the information you have about local doctors, counselors, dentists that are in the VISTA benefits network, making sure that's up to date or that there's information in there. Certain VISTAs might have, certain clinics or providers that have been historically really supportive for them. And then also thinking about national resources like websites, grants, free services, things like that that can be available to everyone. And then also utilizing these group meetings to offer a chance for problem solving and emotional support. And so, it's interesting how even though VISTAs have very different experiences across their sites, there's oftentimes a lot that they share in common. So just creating that space, for VISTA members to be there to support each other and just relate in on what the different challenges are. And also keeping in mind, right, when we make space for different voices, that not every solution works for every VISTA member. A clinic that might be, widely popular in one particular circle, it may not be as accessible or inclusive to a VISTA member who holds particular identities, right? And so just keeping that in mind, that we want to have a wide variety of options in terms of resources that can support VISTA members. And then just honoring the power of mutual aid and pooling resources, potlucks, things like that. I know it can be really difficult when we're all remote, or if you're a VISTA leader that works with VISTAs spread out all over across the state. But there's different ways that we can think about doing that. Crowdsourcing with the National VISTA team. That's a good question and something I would love to hear your thoughts or ideas about how to do that. So this is just a quick look at some of the possible ways you can utilize crowdsourcing with your VISTAs to help build a culture of care. So we're just going to recap what we've covered. We looked at a lot of the different complex and interconnected dimensions of well-being, how they relate to the challenges of VISTA retention. We also looked at the importance of building supportive relationships with your VISTAs through intentional check-ins, and how to start creating a culture of care that values the collective wisdom of the group, and exploring, collective strategies for how to support one another. So I want to point out a few resources that might be helpful. These are included in the materials for the session, along with some others that we looked at. The National Wellness Institute has more information about the 6 dimensions of wellness. If you want to do community building circles or story circles, I can't recommend enough Kay Pranis's Circle Keeper's Handbook. It's available online. There's also some great information about restorative practices through the International Institute for Restorative Practices. Again, I want to highlight Tima Okun and Kenneth Jones' White Supremacy Culture in the Workplace. That article is incredible, and it really changed the way that I think about the type of culture that I want to create in the workplaces that I'm a part of. And then also there's an article about how collective care is our best weapon against COVID-19, right? So the importance of mutual aid, disaster relief in this particular moment. So I would really love to get your feedback on today's webinar. I know it was short, it was a quick hit, but we really hope that you found some valuable resources and also that you might be able to connect and share ideas with each other. So if you could take some time to complete this brief survey, the link has been posted in the chat. We'd really appreciate it.
Great. And Ben, I want to thank you for all the insights you've shared here in the presentation. Again, echo the invitation to all of you for completing our brief little survey. It takes only about 3 minutes. And then we want to get to your questions. So we know a couple of you have already raised questions, but I'm going to officially open our Q&A session. We'll use the chat again just to keep things simple. So you can post it there. And first up, we had a question that says, my site does not enforce check-ins, and I cannot get support from leadership to back me up. Do you have any suggestions for me? So it sounds like this leader is setting up check-ins, but the members aren't participating and not getting support from leadership. So Ben, what do you think?
So I think this is a great opportunity to explore, what a restorative approach might look like in this situation. When we come from a punitive framework, right, where it's about enforcing or dictating some sort of thing, that can be, it can be off-putting, or it can feel like a box they have to check off. So I'm just wondering, and I'm not saying that this is an easy process, but what would it look like to reach out to a VISTA member and ask them if they'd be willing to make some time to check in just because you care about them and want to know how they're doing? Or you might share what it was like for you as a VISTA member and how, you might have had challenges or questions coming up. So I think reaching out from a place of care and interest and curiosity, and then also being willing to hear, like, what are the challenges that are getting in the way? What are the things that would make the VISTA member not want to make time, right? Are they just zoomed out? They don't want another Zoom meeting? Maybe we could do something over phone. Maybe you could do a socially distanced check-in as a walk through the park, something like that. So, so I think it's, okay. And Stephanie added, my members want the check-ins, but the supervisor advises against them. So that might be something worth checking in about. Another thing that I think can be helpful is when members are in agreement about something that they'd like to see. It can be helpful to send out like surveys and just collect that data and kind of, be able to relay that information to your supervisor. So I don't know if that might be helpful as well. But
great. Yeah. Thanks for that, Ben. It's nice to hear how, sort of flip that and look at it from a completely different angle with the restorative approach. Let's see next. I think it was Kaylee had a question saying, how would you recommend doing crowdsourcing or circles with a cohort of 50 or more VISTAs? It's hard to make sure everyone is engaged with such a large group, or making sure everyone feels heard and no one is taking up too much space.
That's a really good question. So one of the things you might consider doing is thinking about if there are different ways that you could break up a cohort of 50 into like family groups or into just small groups. And so that could be anywhere from 6 people to 10 people. And I think also that it probably depends on what your limitations are. You would need a couple of different facilitators if you have 5 groups, for instance, or you might need to do the circles at different times with different groups. But that might be one way to start, is just start with smaller groups and building some rapport. And then what I love about restorative circles is, we tend to offer what the facilitator usually does is they start by going first and modeling how much time to share. And we tend to give them a recommendation of, and we encourage you to share for about a minute as you tell this story. And, if somebody tends to go on really, really long, you can gently remind the group, hey, y'all, I just really want to respect everyone's voice and make sure everyone has time to share. So the idea is that, physically you would go in a circle, but since you can't really do that on Zoom, you could just ask everyone to kind of do it popcorn style, pass it off to the next person. You could go in alphabetical order, however you want to do that, and just ask each person to share once for each question. And that way you're balancing the participation equitably among the group.
Great. Thanks for those ideas, Ben. And Megan says thank you as well. Looking to see if there are other questions here. And I'm not seeing any in the chat right now. So just a reminder, if you have a question for Ben of maybe a situation you've encountered, or you're curious about how you might apply one of these ideas that he's talked about, now's your chance. So just pop it in the chat and we will get to it.
One other thing, I saw the question about how to best crowdsource with a national team. That's another opportunity to break up into small groups and maybe have small groups focus on a different area and kind of do research together about national resources that might be helpful in a particular area, whether it's finances, mental wellness, things like that. So y'all are welcome to reach out to me. I realize it's a very short amount of time, but I would love to share more resources. If you're particularly interested in something, you're very welcome to reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat. And feel free to just reach out.
Great, that's really generous of you. Thank you for offering that, Ben. And let's see, while we're seeing if there are any more questions, just another reminder. So we've got the handouts from the session. There's a copy of the slides, of course. There is a template for taking notes when you do check-ins, and it has those 4 areas that Ben looked at. And then we've got a list of all the resources that he mentioned throughout the whole session. And thank you, Jeff, for dropping the link into the chat. All right, so latest question from Riley. Would any of the VISTA leaders be interested in doing an Insta Live Q&A with other leaders and the organization they serve with? So maybe that's a question for all of you, and you can respond to Riley there in the chat. So it looks like there's some interest here. Maybe not Instagram for everybody, but sounds like there's good interest. All right, so Riley, I'm going to take this as your offering to help organize. And so what I'll do after the session, I'll go through the chat, and everybody who said yes, I'll collect well, actually, you've got your email there. So everyone who's interested, you see Riley's email, just grab that and then shoot a message to Riley for setting that up. And thank you all for that. Let's see, Ashley comments, I have to give great props to my site. They do a lot of this extremely well, and I would love to share their strategies. Great.
That's awesome.
Here's a question from Andy Mendez. What strategies have you used to create buy-in and consistency around VISTA buddies?
I think that's a really good question. And again, I think this is one of those areas where you have to try to see if you can implement things from the bottom up. So that might be asking VISTA members what they would think about some sort of a buddy system, whether that means, whether they would prefer to connect with a VISTA who's been on their site longer, whether it would be helpful to connect with a VISTA who's in a similar sort of area of service. But so trying to get feedback and information about whether VISTAs actually want that, and if they do want it, what they would want it to look like, right? So really giving them the space to build out something like that. And then when it becomes, part of the program, when it becomes normalized, then you sort of find a way to just welcome new VISTA members into that and say, hey, this is a practice that we've developed, while still keeping, open for feedback and suggestions to improve that. I know in some of our programs, the sort of mentoring or big little pairings like that, that's evolved over time just based on the needs of the members themselves.
All right, great. This will be last call for questions. If you've got one, let's hear it. Otherwise, I'll do just another plug for our brief evaluation survey. It's probably already open in your browser window behind the Zoom window. Takes about 3 minutes, according to SurveyMonkey, to fill it out. And Jeff, thank you. There's the link in case it's not in your window. All right, well, I think we will wrap up the questions now. And I do want to give you a heads up about what's coming up. So next month, we have, of course, another webinar for leaders. This time it's on designing effective surveys. It's going to be on January 14th. This session will be led by a professional evaluator. And there's kind of a cool opportunity that she's making available. If you have, say, a draft survey that you'd like to get some input on, you'll be able to send it in advance, and then this evaluator will take a look at it, and during the presentation make recommendations for how to improve a particular question or some other aspect of the survey. So watch for the email invitation that's going to come out tomorrow, and that will have instructions for how you can submit your survey if you like. And even if you don't have a survey, we hope you'll join us for that. I want to thank our production team today, Kim Adams and Jeff Banis from LSI. Instructional design assistance was provided by Bethany DeSablin at Education Northwest. And of course, a huge special thanks to our presenter, Ben Brubaker. And I want to thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. That concludes our webinar.